Hi friends. And now a recap of the movie Closer. Dan is a young writer walking down the street in central London. He notices a young woman with short, reddish-dyed hair walking in the opposite direction. They meet eyes and start smiling at each other. Unaccustomed to the fact that in the UK, cars drive on the left side of the road, she looks in the wrong direction, crosses the road, and gets hit by a car. Dan runs towards her. She raises her head and says, "Hi, stranger." She is not badly hurt, other than a bruised left knee and a few cuts and bruises, and Dan takes her to the hospital, where they begin to get to know each other. As they leave the hospital, they pass through a park that Dan remembers from childhood. They pass by the wall and notice that it is inscribed with the names of firefighters, policemen, and all those who gave their lives to save other people. They get on the bus and continue their conversation. We learn that Dan is an aspiring writer who moonlights writing obituaries. A young American woman introduces herself as Alice Ayres. She reveals that she is a stripper from New York who came to London to end a failed relationship. Finally, they arrive at Dan's office. He says goodbye and starts to leave, but then turns around. When asked if he has a girlfriend, he says yes. 1 year later, Dan is photographed in Anna's small studio. Dan and Alice live together, and Dan has written a novel about his romantic life with Alice. Anna photographs him for the cover of his recently released book. Anna is an American photographer who mainly shoots portraits of strangers. She mentions that she enjoys going to the aquarium and taking pictures of people there. She reveals to Dan that she currently lives separately from her husband. He learns that he read his book and liked it. They kiss, and she learns that he has a girlfriend and that the book is based on her. She breaks the kiss the moment he confesses that he really likes her and needs to see her. She asks him to forget about it. At that moment, the doorbell rings, and it is Alice, who has come to meet Dan, having just been released from her job at the local coffee shop. He lets her into the studio, where he and Anna meet. Alice asks Anna to take her picture, and Dan leaves so they can be alone. She starts taking pictures, and Alice reveals that she heard their conversation on the intercom when she was downstairs. She turns away, and Anna begins to apologize. Alice returns with tears in her eyes and yells at Anna to take a picture. A little later, Dan is sitting in his apartment at the computer. He is in the chat, and for the sake of a joke, he entered it under the name of a woman. On the net, he meets another man whose name is Larry. He is a dermatologist and sexaholic who surfs the net while working. When he asks Dan for his name, Dan tells him Anna. They write each other hot and passionate letters, and Dan jokingly invites Larry to meet in person. He tells him to meet him at the aquarium. Larry arrives there the next day, and coincidentally, Anna is there. He approaches her, and they discover that Dan has played a trick on him. He gets embarrassed, she has fun, and they begin to chat. 4 months later, Dan and Alice are getting ready to go to Anna's art exhibition. We also learn that Dan's father has just passed away, and Dan is going to the funeral in the countryside after the art exhibition. Alice wants to go with him and support him, but he wants to be alone. They go to an exhibition and see a photograph in which Anna captured Alice with tears in her eyes. While Alice is looking at it, she meets Larry. A short conversation takes place between the two, during which Alice and Larry lightly flirt, and she learns that Larry and Anna are dating when she approaches and greets Larry. During a conversation between them, Dan is clearly still in love with Anna, and she tells him and Alice how he and Larry met and that they call him Cupid. We also learn that Dan's book flopped, and he is back as an obituary writer. A little later, Dan puts Alice in a taxi outside the building, pretending to go straight to the funeral, but in fact he returns to talk to Anna again. After some time, Dan returns home after work and confesses to Alice that he is in love with Anna. He also says that their romance began at the exhibition and that he can't do anything about it. A scandal begins, and Alice collects her things. In tears, she asks him how he got to this point and why he betrayed her. There is a moment in everyone's life when you have to choose between resisting and not doing it or giving up, to which Dan replies that he just fell in love. Alice runs out of the apartment. Meanwhile, Larry returns home after a business trip, where Anna is already waiting for him, and as it turns out, they are already husband and wife. When Larry starts talking to Anna, he senses that something is wrong. She also confesses that she loves Dan. Larry raises a scandal. He starts yelling at Anna and, in a rage, begins to ask questions about Anna's intimate life with Dan, after which he kicks her out. 6 months later, Larry is at a strip club. He agrees with a dancer about a private dance in the room. She willingly gives herself to him. Afterwards, she flirts, smiles, and tells him her name is Jane Jones. Larry is worried about his recent divorce from Anna and is frustrated that Alice is playing with him and not taking him seriously. He says he wants to sleep with her, and she tells him no. Then he demands that she start looking at him more intimately, and she complies with his request. A few months later, Anna rushes to meet Dan at a music concert. She apologizes for being late. They sit down for a drink, and we learn that earlier in the day, she met with Larry to sign the divorce papers. A few minutes later, Dan guesses that Anna slept with Larry that day, and he turns out to be right. A flashback shows the meeting, and Larry says he will sign the divorce papers if she sleeps with him one last time, and she agrees. Anna says she did it to end it all, and that all Larry got was her body. Dan is still upset. A few more months later, Dan breaks into Larry's office and angrily reveals that Anna left him and went back to Larry. Dan tries to argue with him and claim that it's Larry's fault, but Larry reveals that Anna never filed for divorce. She returned to Larry because she is doomed to an unstable relationship because she is depressed. But he still loves her and wants to be with her. Larry is angry at Dan at first, but then he starts to feel sorry for him because Dan is really heartbroken and starts crying. He tells Dan to go back to Alice, and Dan replies that he doesn't know where she is. Larry tells him about the strip club and assures him that he didn't sleep with Alice when he saw her there. As Dan is about to leave, Larry tells Dan that he actually slept with Alice. "And I lied. I slept with Alice." "I'm sorry," he said. Dan goes to a strip club and sees Alice dancing on stage. They both look into each other's eyes and seem happy to see each other again. Alice and Dan are in a hotel room near Heathrow Airport. They look very happy together. She plans to return to New York and has decided to take him with her as a gift. Alice notes that this is the day they first met on a London street corner, which was 4 years ago, and Dan notices how quickly time flies. Dan asks Alice if she slept with Larry, and she says no. He demands that she tell him the truth. He eventually leaves the room for cigarettes and asks Alice to tell the truth when he returns. On the way, he turns around and returns to Alice with a flower. She tells him that she is no longer in love with him. She tells him that she just stopped loving him because he kept talking about Larry. She finally admits the truth. She and Larry actually slept together that night after they ran into each other at the strip club. Dan tells her that he knew all along and has already forgiven her. He tells her it doesn't matter and that he loves her. But she is fed up and asks him to leave. She starts yelling at him and he slaps her. Shaken by this outburst of violence, Dan leaves the room. Alice returns to New York alone. At the same time, Dan remains in London. He passes by the park where they met on the first day and notices one of the names on the wall, Alice Ayres. Back in New York, when Alice clears immigration, we see that her real name on the passport is Jane Jones, the name she gave Larry when he asked her real name at the strip club. She walks down a busy New York street and then crosses the street against the Do Not Walk signal, reminding us of the opening scene when she inadvertently crossed a street in London, was hit by a taxi, and met Dan. However, she returns to her native country to meet an uncertain future, alone.